Hello everyone, welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight we will talk about a question that is both strange and fascinating. Is there a part of you that never sleeps? At first, it might sound like a riddle, but it points us toward one of the deepest mysteries of consciousness. When your body rests and your mind drifts into dreams, is there still an observer inside, a watcher that never fully turns off? If so, what is it, and what does that mean for the nature of who you are? Before we begin, I'd like to ask you, what time is it right now where you are, and where are you listening from? Share it in the comments. I always find it amazing that people from so many different places come together here to explore these mysteries. To start unraveling this, we have to understand the difference between the mind that thinks and the self that observes. In your daily life, you identify with your thoughts. If you're worrying about something, you feel as if you are the worry. If you're planning tomorrow, you feel as if you are the planner. Yet there are moments when you notice yourself thinking. You can say to yourself, I'm having this thought. That simple act shows there is an observer behind the thought. But is this observer active only when you are awake, or is it present at all times? The question is not new. Philosophers and mystics have asked it for centuries. In Buddhism, for example, there's the concept of pure awareness, a witness that is not bound to thought or sensation, but simply observes. In modern neuroscience, researchers often describe the default mode network, a collection of brain regions that create your sense of self, your autobiography, and your inner chatter. But even if that network slows during deep sleep, something remains. You don't vanish entirely when unconscious. You wake up, you remember, and you carry on. So where was that continuity stored? To answer, we need to think about what happens during the sleep cycle. Scientists break it into several stages: light sleep, deep, slow wave sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep, or REM. In light sleep, your brain still processes sounds and sensations. In deep sleep, most activity slows dramatically, and the sense of time and self almost disappears. In REM, your brain comes alive again, generating dreams with rich narratives and emotional tones. But here's the puzzle. People report a sense of having been present even when the dream itself vanishes from memory. You wake up and say, I slept well, or I had no dreams, yet you don't feel as if you ceased to exist entirely. The body rested, the conscious mind went offline, but the thread of you continued. Let's think about memory. When you go to sleep, you don't wake up the next morning as a new person. You recall your life, your name, and everything you were doing the day before. That means something was maintaining continuity. Even if you don't remember the experience of sleeping, the observer within you reattaches seamlessly. If you truly vanished, how would you pick up again? So one possibility is that this observer never actually turns off. It simply shifts modes, moving into a background state that doesn't register as normal awareness, but still holds continuity. Some scientists suggest that consciousness might be more like a spectrum than a switch. It's not that you are either awake or not, but that awareness dims or brightens across different levels. Imagine a lamp with a dimmer rather than a lamp that just turns on and off. When you're awake, the lamp is bright. When you're drowsy, it's lower. When you're in deep sleep, it's very faint, but not entirely gone. And if this is true, then some core aspect of you, the observer, remains present even in the deepest unconscious state. This idea grows even more intriguing when we look at phenomena like lucid dreaming. In a lucid dream, the dreamer realizes, wait, I'm dreaming. That realization is the observer coming forward inside a dream. It shows that the capacity to witness never vanished. It was simply hidden until a spark of recognition brought it into awareness again. Lucid dreamers describe feeling a double presence. Part of them is immersed in the dream story, while another part steps back and watches. If the observer can appear in the dream, maybe it never left in the first place. There are also stories of anesthesia awareness. In rare cases, patients undergoing surgery report being able to observe what was happening even when they appeared completely unconscious. They could not move or speak, yet afterward they described sounds, conversations, and even feelings. These cases are controversial and not fully understood, but they suggest that the observer within us may sometimes persist even when the conscious mind is disconnected from its usual functions. Another perspective comes from physics. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that observation plays a role in shaping reality at the smallest scales. If the universe requires an observer to bring certain events into being, then what happens when you are not observing? Does the observer vanish, or does it remain silently sustaining the thread of existence? It raises the possibility that the observer in you is not only a feature of the brain, but also tied to something more fundamental in the structure of reality. But let's ground this in neuroscience again. Functional MRI scans show that even in sleep, the brain is not entirely quiet. There are bursts of activity in regions connected to self-processing and memory consolidation. The hippocampus, responsible for forming long-term memories, remains active, sorting through experiences and weaving them into the fabric of your personal story. So even as you rest, some part of your brain is still you, working in the background to maintain your identity and continuity. Could that be the observer at work, an unconscious custodian of the self? If we turn to psychology, we see experiments in attention that shed light on this. In mindfulness studies, participants are trained to notice thoughts without becoming lost in them. Over time, they describe a deeper sense of the observer, the silent awareness behind the mind. Interestingly, long-term meditators often report that this awareness doesn't vanish in sleep. They claim to maintain a thread of witnessing even in deep rest, sometimes described as dreamless sleep awareness. While difficult to prove scientifically, it suggests that the observer self can be trained to stay online across different states of consciousness. There's also the phenomenon of out-of-body experiences. Some people, during trauma or near-death experiences, report floating above their bodies, watching events unfold. Whether these are hallucinations generated by the brain under stress or something beyond, they raise the same point. The observer feels separate from the physical body and mind. And if that's true, maybe it doesn't sleep at all in the way the body does. So here we are at the edge of a mystery. When you close your eyes and drift away, something remains. It may not think, it may not dream, it may not even register time, but it does not vanish. The observer may be the deepest part of you, the core awareness that never fully goes offline. Some traditions call it the soul, others call it pure consciousness, and science is still searching for a precise definition. What makes this fascinating is that it challenges our everyday assumption about who we are. Most people believe they are their thoughts, their feelings, their memories, but those are constantly changing, and they pause during sleep. The observer, however, remains. If you are not your thoughts, then maybe you are the awareness that notices them. If you are not your memories, then maybe you are the presence that holds them. That presence seems remarkably stable, and perhaps it is what never sleeps. Imagine for a moment what that means. Right now, as you listen to this, you are both the person who thinks about the words I'm saying and the awareness that hears them. Tonight, when you fall asleep, the thinking mind will quiet, but the awareness will not disappear. It will simply dim, like a lantern covered by a veil. And tomorrow, when you wake, it will be there again, shining as brightly as ever. This leads to a powerful reflection. What if the observer is the most real part of you? What if everything else, your personality, your worries, your plans, is like a costume you wear during waking life, but the observer is who you truly are, timeless and enduring? If that's true, then sleep doesn't erase you. It only hides you under the rhythms of biology. The part of you that never sleeps is waiting patiently, silent but always there. When you close your eyes at night and drift off, it feels like you're surrendering everything: your thoughts, your plans, your sense of control. Yet deep inside your brain, an astonishing drama unfolds. The scientific study of sleep has revealed that the brain never truly stops working. Instead, it shifts between intricate rhythms, reorganizing itself, repairing itself, and processing information in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. To grasp what it means for some part of you to never sleep, we have to start by breaking down what actually happens when you sleep. Sleep is not a simple state of unconsciousness. It's a complex cycle with distinct stages, each involving unique patterns of brain activity. These stages alternate in repeating cycles, lasting about 90 minutes each, and they shape everything from your dreams to your memory. The two main categories are non-REM sleep and REM sleep. Non-REM sleep itself has 3 stages. The first is light sleep, when you drift in and out and can be awakened easily. The second is a deeper stage, when your brain begins to produce slower waves called spindles and K-complexes. And the third is slow wave sleep, sometimes called deep sleep, when the brain produces long, slow delta waves. This is when your body repairs tissues, strengthens the immune system, and releases growth hormones. Finally, REM sleep, the most mysterious stage, brings rapid eye movement, increased brain activity, and vivid dreams. Now here's the remarkable part. Even though these stages are defined by shifts in consciousness, your brain never fully powers down. Instead, it changes its mode of operation. During non-REM deep sleep, for example, your cortex enters highly synchronized oscillations. It looks quiet on a brain scan, but what's really happening is that billions of neurons are firing in unison, like a massive wave rippling across the sea. Some researchers believe this coordination is essential for memory consolidation, the process of storing the day's experiences into long-term memory. So even in your deepest sleep, your brain is hard at work keeping your identity intact. This raises an intriguing point. If memory formation continues in sleep, doesn't that imply some part of awareness is still present? After all, memories are typically tied to conscious experience. If your mind were completely gone during sleep, how could anything be remembered? Sleep researchers have wrestled with this question for decades. One famous experiment involved playing sounds to participants while they slept. Later, when awake, many of them recognized the sounds, even though they had no recollection of hearing them during the night. This suggests that the sleeping brain is not only processing information, but also storing it in subtle ways that bypass your usual sense of awareness. Your conscious mind may be absent, but another level of mind is still listening. This leads us to the idea of sleep learning. For many years, people dreamed of learning a new language or skill while they slept, simply by listening to recordings. While most studies show that complex learning is unlikely during sleep, some research suggests that certain types of conditioning, like forming associations between sounds and smells, do happen. Your brain is still watching, still learning, even while you are unaware of it. Neuroscience has also uncovered another strange phenomenon: sleep spindles. These are bursts of rapid brain activity that occur in non-REM sleep. They are believed to protect sleep by preventing external stimuli from waking you up. But spindles also play a role in memory processing. What's fascinating is that they seem to represent a kind of negotiation between the conscious and unconscious brain. Even though you're asleep, your brain is actively choosing what to ignore and what to process. In other words, some part of your awareness is still acting as a gatekeeper, deciding what gets through. Dreaming itself is perhaps the most compelling evidence that part of you never fully sleeps. Dreams are rich, immersive experiences filled with imagery, emotion, and narrative. They can feel so real that for a time you believe them completely. The fact that the brain can generate entire worlds while the body lies still suggests that consciousness is not only active during sleep, but flourishing in a different mode. Dreams are consciousness without the tether of physical reality. Lucid dreaming adds another layer to this mystery. When you become aware that you're dreaming, you are essentially waking up inside your dream. Studies show that lucid dreamers can even signal researchers by moving their eyes in pre-arranged patterns during REM sleep. This means that the dreaming brain is capable of reflective self-awareness. Some part of you not only experiences the dream, but can also step back and recognize, I am dreaming. How can this be explained if consciousness truly shuts down in sleep? The answer seems to be that consciousness doesn't disappear at all, it transforms. During waking life, it's oriented toward external reality, constantly processing sensory input. During sleep, it turns inward, generating its own landscapes. During deep sleep, it may quiet down to a nearly invisible background hum, but the possibility of awareness remains, ready to flare up at any moment. Some of the most extraordinary evidence for this comes from studies of people in comas or under anesthesia. In both cases, patients are expected to be unconscious, yet brain scans often reveal subtle responses to spoken words or familiar voices. In some instances, patients later reported being aware of their surroundings even though doctors believed they were completely unconscious. If awareness can persist in those states, why not in sleep as well? Another important angle is the role of the default mode network, or DMN. This is a set of brain regions active when you are daydreaming, mind-wandering, or reflecting inwardly. It quiets down during focused tasks, but becomes active again when your mind drifts. Interestingly, parts of the DMN remain active during sleep, especially REM sleep. This could explain why dreams often feel like an extension of your waking imagination. The same network that generates inner thoughts during the day may continue to generate dream worlds at night. So where does this leave us? From a scientific standpoint, the brain never fully shuts down, and consciousness may never entirely vanish. It shifts forms, sometimes fading into dream imagery, sometimes retreating into deep silence, sometimes reawakening within the dream itself. This suggests that the observer self might not be a mystical illusion, but a genuine feature of human consciousness. But science alone can't fully answer this question. Measuring brain activity is one thing. Explaining the subjective experience of always being aware is another. This is where neuroscience meets philosophy, the so-called hard problem of consciousness. Why is it that brain activity produces subjective experience at all? And if awareness is truly fundamental, could it exist independently of brain states? merely shining through them in different ways? These are profound questions, and we'll keep circling back to them as we move deeper into our exploration. But for now, one thing is clear: your brain, your mind, and your awareness are not simple on-off switches. They are more like shifting waves, rising and falling, yet always connected to the ocean of yourself. Even as you sleep, that ocean remains. If you think back to your own experience, maybe you've noticed moments when you wake in the night with the vivid sense that you were aware the whole time. Maybe you felt yourself observing the transition into dreams, or floating in the space between sleeping and waking. These moments are hints, small glimpses into the possibility that there truly is a part of you that never sleeps. If your body and brain move through cycles of activity and rest, of waking and dreaming, then what about the you who experiences it all? This question lies at the heart of whether some part of you never sleeps. Science can explain electrical oscillations in the brain and the chemistry of neurotransmitters, but there remains a deeper puzzle. Who or what is the observer of these states? Is there something in you that transcends the rhythms of the body and mind? Across many spiritual and philosophical traditions, there is an idea that awareness itself is never interrupted. This awareness is not the same as thoughts, emotions, or perceptions. It is the silent witness that observes them. Thoughts come and go, sensations appear and disappear, but awareness itself, pure consciousness, is said to be constant. Even in deep sleep, according to this view, awareness remains. It is simply not directed toward objects or experiences, but resting in its own stillness. In Advaita Vedanta, for instance, there is the concept of turiya, the fourth state. The first three states are waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. But turiya is the background that remains through them all. It is the timeless witness, unaffected by changes in the body or mind. Teachers of this tradition suggest that if you can recognize this awareness within yourself, you'll realize that it has never been absent, not in waking, not in dreaming, and not in sleep. It is the same awareness that hears these words right now. Buddhist philosophy makes a similar claim, though it uses different language. In many schools of Buddhism, awareness is described as luminous and ever-present, like the open sky. Thoughts and perceptions are like clouds passing through. Sleep, then, is not the absence of awareness, but simply a period when the usual clouds of sensory input are gone. What remains is the clear sky itself. In advanced meditation practices, some practitioners even report maintaining awareness through sleep, consciously observing the shift into dreamless states. This idea isn't limited to Eastern philosophy. In Western thought, mystics and philosophers have also hinted at the presence of a timeless witness. Plotinus, the ancient philosopher, described an intellect beyond intellect, a level of consciousness untouched by the movements of the mind. Even Descartes, known for his rationalism, arrived at the famous conclusion, "I think, therefore I am." But perhaps a deeper truth is not, "I think, therefore I am," but rather, "I am aware, therefore I am." If this is true, then awareness is not something that switches off at night. It is not dependent on whether your senses are active or your brain waves are fast or slow. It is fundamental. In fact, some contemporary philosophers argue that consciousness may be a basic property of reality, as fundamental as space, time, or energy. This view, called panpsychism, suggests that awareness doesn't emerge from complex brains, but is woven into the fabric of the universe itself. If so, then the awareness you experience is simply a local expression of this universal field, and of course, it never sleeps. because reality itself never sleeps. But let's bring this back to your own experience. Have you ever had the sense, upon waking, that no time has passed? Hours might have gone by, but to you, it feels as if you just closed your eyes. This gap suggests that some part of you did not experience the passage of time at all. It's as though awareness was simply waiting, timeless, until you returned. This timelessness is a clue. If awareness can exist without a sense of time, then it is not bound by the same rhythms as the body and mind. Another clue comes from people who practice deep meditation. Some report slipping into states where thought ceases, the body is deeply at rest, and yet awareness remains completely clear. They describe it as witnessing sleep, a condition where the body sleeps but the mind does not. Studies using EEG scans have even shown that advanced meditators can enter deep sleep without losing conscious awareness. Their brains display the slow wave patterns of sleep, yet they later report full awareness of the entire process. Consider also the phenomenon of near-death experiences. People who have been clinically dead, no heartbeat, no measurable brain activity, sometimes report vivid experiences of awareness, floating above their body, seeing light, feeling an expansive sense of unity. While skeptics argue these are hallucinations triggered by a dying brain, others point out that some reports contain verifiable details of events that occurred while the body was medically unconscious. If awareness can persist in such states, then perhaps it truly is independent of the physical brain. From another perspective, think about your dreams. When you're in a dream, it feels real. You are aware, moving through a world, responding to situations. Then you wake up and you realize that world was made of mind alone. But what if waking life is not so different? What if your daytime experience is simply another kind of dream, constructed by the brain and perceived by the same timeless awareness? In that case, the only constant is not the dream itself, but the one who observes it. This brings us to the idea of the I that never sleeps. Throughout your life, your experiences change. Your body changes, your thoughts change, even your personality evolves. But the sense of I am remains. You are not the same as you were 5 years ago, and yet you are. The continuity comes not from the content of your life, but from the awareness that experiences it. If you track back through memory, you'll find that in every stage, there was always the same I watching. And if you follow that thread into sleep, perhaps you'll see that the witness is still there, silent, timeless, awake. But how can you know this for yourself? One way is through direct exploration. Tonight, as you fall asleep, try paying close attention to the transition. Notice the moment your thoughts begin to dissolve into dream imagery. See if you can catch yourself crossing the threshold. Sometimes, if you remain relaxed but attentive, you may find that awareness continues even as the body drifts off. You might notice the hum of silence, the presence of being, without any images or thoughts. This is a glimpse of the timeless witness. Another approach is to reflect in the morning, upon waking. Ask yourself, was I truly absent, or was awareness simply without content? The gap you felt may not have been the absence of awareness, but the absence of memory. Memory and awareness are not the same. You can be aware without forming memories, just as you can look at something briefly and then forget it, though you were conscious in the moment. Sleep may be the same. Awareness remains, but memory does not. This distinction is crucial. If you believe that being aware means having memory of the experience, then deep sleep looks like unconsciousness. But if awareness is deeper than memory, then deep sleep could simply be a state where memory is offline while awareness continues. This aligns with the teachings of many wisdom traditions, which insist that the witness never vanishes. Philosophers call this line of thought epistemic humility, the recognition that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because you don't remember being aware in sleep doesn't mean awareness was gone. It may simply mean that memory was not recording. After all, there are countless waking moments you don't remember either, but you were still aware when they happened. The idea of the timeless witness also connects to modern physics in surprising ways. In relativity, time itself is not absolute. It stretches and bends depending on your speed and gravity. From the perspective of the universe, all moments exist simultaneously: the past, the present, and the future. If consciousness is fundamental, it could also exist outside the flow of time. In that case, the witness in you may not only never sleep, but may never age or die. It simply observes the changing display of experience, like watching frames of a film pass before the light of the projector. So what are we left with? On one hand, neuroscience shows that the brain is always active, even in sleep. On the other hand, philosophy and personal experience suggest that awareness itself is deeper than the brain, perhaps timeless and ever-present. Put together, these perspectives point to a profound possibility. Some part of you, the witnessing awareness, never sleeps. When you lie down tonight, consider this. The body will rest, the brain will reorganize, dreams will unfold. But beyond all of it, awareness remains. Like the sky holding every cloud, it never leaves, never blinks, never closes its eyes. When we ask whether a part of you never sleeps, the answer is rarely simple. The body does rest, the mind cycles, and consciousness flickers between different modes of awareness. But what happens inside the brain suggests that some systems are always on duty. To understand this more clearly, we need to look at the brain as a complex network of specialized regions, each designed to handle specific forms of information. Not all of them are conscious, not all of them ever fully turn off. Let's start with a concrete fact. Even when you are in the deepest stages of sleep, your brain is consuming about 20% of your body's total energy. That means the brain remains one of the most metabolically demanding organs, no matter how still you may look on the outside. This level of constant energy use hints that something is always happening beneath the surface of awareness. One of the most important findings in neuroscience over the past 20 years is the role of the default mode network, or DMN. This is a set of interconnected brain regions, including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus. The DMN is active when your mind is wandering, when you're thinking about yourself, or when you're imagining future events. During sleep, the DMN doesn't simply vanish. In REM sleep, for example, parts of this network remain active and may even be responsible for the rich, immersive quality of dreams. In deep non-REM sleep, its activity is reduced, but not entirely gone. Some scientists suggest that the DMN is one of the brain's continuous background processes, always constructing and maintaining a model of the self. In other words, the observer may not be a mystical presence at all, but an emergent property of networks like this, running even when we're unaware of them. Consider another layer, the reticular activating system in the brainstem. This ancient structure regulates wakefulness and arousal. Even while asleep, it doesn't shut down. Instead, it maintains enough vigilance to process important sensory input. A mother may sleep through passing cars but awaken instantly at the sound of her baby. This selective sensitivity suggests that the brainstem is always watching, filtering incoming signals, and deciding what requires a transition back to full wakefulness. It never completely rests, because if it did, survival would be at risk. Then there's the question of memory. The hippocampus and related regions in the medial temporal lobe are active during specific stages of sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep. This is when memories are consolidated, transferred from temporary storage into long-term structures. The intriguing point here is that while you might not be aware, the brain is actively working on shaping and preserving the narrative of your life. From the perspective of function, this can be seen as another form of silent observation. The brain is monitoring, organizing, and recording, even when the conscious self is absent. On a more microscopic scale, the brain also relies on something called the glymphatic system. This is a waste clearance pathway, flushing out metabolic byproducts from neurons. Interestingly, the glymphatic system becomes most active during sleep. In effect, your brain is cleaning itself, repairing, and maintaining its environment. While this might not sound like an observer, it does show that fundamental processes never pause. The cells and circuits are engaged in constant housekeeping, ensuring continuity of function. But perhaps the most compelling evidence that something within you never sleeps comes from the study of microarousals and local sleep phenomena. In the past, researchers assumed that sleep was a global state, the entire brain either awake or asleep. But modern recordings show that small clusters of neurons can be in different states simultaneously. For example, one part of the cortex may exhibit sleep-like slow waves, while another part continues firing as if awake. This has been observed in both animals and humans. What this suggests is that consciousness is not an all-or-nothing switch. Instead, it's a distributed process where different regions take turns, resting and activating. At any given moment, some part of your brain remains in a state that resembles watchfulness. This distributed model of the brain complicates the idea of a single observer self. Instead of one entity watching over everything, it may be more accurate to think of the brain as a collection of partial observers. The visual cortex watches the world of light and shapes. The auditory cortex monitors soundscapes. The hippocampus monitors memories. The prefrontal cortex monitors goals and decision-making. None of these regions holds the entire picture alone, but together they create the feeling of a continuous self. Even when consciousness is offline, many of these monitoring functions continue in the background. Another fascinating line of evidence comes from studies on anesthesia. When people are under general anesthesia, they often report no memory of time passing, as if awareness simply vanished. But closer measurement reveals that the brain is still active in certain layers. Sensory cortices may still respond weakly to sound or touch. Pain signals can still be transmitted, which is why anesthesiologists use multiple agents to suppress both sensation and awareness. What this tells us is that awareness can be suppressed while monitoring continues. In a sense, the brain keeps watch, even when the conscious self is absent. Electrophysiological studies have also highlighted the role of gamma oscillations, high-frequency brain waves often associated with consciousness. These oscillations never entirely disappear. They may change in frequency and synchrony, but they persist across different states, including sleep and anesthesia. Some scientists propose that gamma oscillations are part of the underlying neural scaffolding of awareness, a baseline hum of neural coordination that never fully stops. If so, then there really is a continuous substrate of observation woven into your biology. Now let's step back and consider what all this means. The idea of an observer self can sometimes sound mystical or abstract, but neuroscience gives us a framework to understand it in physical terms. The observer might not be a singular separate presence, but the combined effect of distributed monitoring systems across the brain. Each one performs its duty, filtering sound, watching for danger, consolidating memory, regulating vital functions. When combined, they create the impression of a part of you that is always on, always aware at some level. We also can't ignore the role of the body in this equation. The nervous system extends beyond the brain, into the spinal cord and peripheral nerves. Your heart maintains rhythm, regulated by pacemaker cells that never pause. Your lungs adjust breathing patterns through autonomic control. Hormonal systems continue cycling through circadian rhythms. These processes are not conscious, but they reflect the broader principle that life itself is never fully off duty. Consciousness, in this sense, might be the tip of a much larger iceberg of constant biological activity. What is particularly interesting is how these scientific findings align with subjective reports of always being there. People who undergo surgeries, comas, or near-death experiences sometimes report a sense of continuity, as though a part of them never left. While the interpretation of such accounts is debated, the neurological evidence shows that the brain and body never truly switch off entirely. There is always activity, always monitoring, always adjustment. From this perspective, the question, is there a part of you that never sleeps, may not point to a mysterious separate self, but to the very structure of your biology. Sleep is not an absence, but a reconfiguration of activity. Conscious awareness dims, but other forms of vigilance, processing, and regulation continue. If we redefine the observer not as a single entity, but as a network of ongoing processes, then yes, there is indeed a part of you that never sleeps. By seeing the brain this way, we come to a deeper respect for the complexity of our inner systems. You are not simply an on-off switch between wakefulness and sleep. You are a living network, some regions resting, some active, some watching, some dreaming. Awareness itself is built on this layered activity, never entirely paused, but continuously shifting in form. When you fall asleep, it can feel like the curtain drops, the lights go out, and the show of awareness ends for the night. But neuroscience tells a different story. Consciousness may be better understood as a theatre that never fully closes. The spotlight dims, the actors rest, but backstage crews, stagehands, and quiet rehearsals continue. To make sense of whether there's a part of you that never sleeps, we need to dig into the scientific theories of consciousness and see how they explain this persistent activity. One of the most widely studied frameworks is global workspace theory, GWT, first proposed by Bernard Baars and later expanded by neuroscientists like Stanislas Dehaene. According to GWT, the brain contains many specialized processors: visual regions, auditory regions, memory circuits, motor plans. Most of these operate unconsciously. What we call conscious awareness happens when information from one of these processors is broadcast across the global workspace, making it available to the whole system. It's like a spotlight on stage. Whatever is illuminated becomes accessible to the audience of the brain, while the rest remains in the dark. Now here's the critical part. Even during sleep, the local processors don't shut down. Visual regions are still active, auditory systems still process sound, and memory circuits continue organizing experiences. The spotlight of consciousness narrows or vanishes, but the stagehands are still moving props and adjusting the scenery. Dreams may even represent moments when the spotlight comes back on, briefly illuminating an internal drama. From the perspective of GWT, there is always activity, but what changes is whether that activity is globally shared. This means that a form of pre-conscious processing continues non-stop, even while you sleep. Another leading framework is integrated information theory, developed by Giulio Tononi. IIT suggests that consciousness corresponds to the capacity of a system to integrate information. The more interconnected and irreducible the system, the higher its level of consciousness. In waking states, the brain demonstrates high integration. Different regions constantly exchange and bind information. In deep sleep, this integration weakens. Activity still happens, but it's fragmented, less unified. The overall amount of consciousness decreases. However, it never drops to zero, because some integration always persists. From the IIT perspective, there is no complete blackout, only a reduction in the richness of experience. The lights dim, but they never go fully dark. Let's also consider what happens at the level of brain rhythms. In wakefulness, the brain produces fast oscillations, particularly beta and gamma waves, which reflect active communication between regions. In non-REM sleep, slow waves dominate, but they are punctuated by bursts called sleep spindles and K-complexes. These events are not random noise. They play roles in memory consolidation and sensory gating. Even in the quieter stages of sleep, your brain is actively processing, deciding what to remember, what to discard, and what to ignore. The system remains operational, simply focused on different priorities. One of the most striking discoveries of recent years is that conscious-like processing can occur without full awareness. For example, research shows that sleepers can respond to external cues. In one experiment, scientists presented words or sound to sleeping participants and measured brain responses. Remarkably, some sleepers showed neural signatures of semantic processing, meaning they not only heard the sound but partially understood it, even without waking up. In another study, people trained to perform simple mental tasks while awake were able to continue those tasks in light sleep, as confirmed by EEG recordings. This blurs the boundary between sleep and wakefulness, suggesting that awareness is more graded than binary. What about the phenomenon of lucid dreaming? In lucid dreams, a sleeper becomes aware that they are dreaming and sometimes gains control over the dream's events. Neuroscientists studying lucid dreamers found reactivation of the prefrontal cortex, an area usually less active during normal dreams. This means that a higher level monitoring system, normally dampened in REM sleep, can sometimes reawaken. In other words, the observer resurfaces inside the dream. Lucid dreaming provides a unique window into the fact that the brain never fully loses the capacity for awareness. It can reassemble self-reflective monitoring, even in the depths of sleep. Another key concept is the continuity hypothesis of dreaming, which suggests that dreams reflect waking concerns, emotions, and experiences. The brain appears to be simulating scenarios, testing possible outcomes, and emotionally processing unresolved experiences. If this is true, then the dreaming brain isn't just idling, it's actively working on the challenges of waking life. This ongoing simulation could be seen as another way the mind keeps watch, ensuring that problems are rehearsed and encoded even when you're not aware of it. On a more physiological level, the autonomic nervous system remains active throughout sleep. Heart rate variability, breathing rhythms, and temperature regulation are continuously adjusted. If you overheat, you might shift positions. If oxygen dips, your breathing deepens. These adjustments happen outside of conscious control, but demonstrate that you, as an organism, never truly switch off. The monitoring continues in the background, maintaining the balance necessary for survival. Let's connect this with micro-awakenings. During a typical night, you don't sleep in one unbroken stretch. Instead, your brain cycles through stages, with brief arousals scattered throughout. Most of these awakenings last only seconds and are forgotten, but they provide evidence that consciousness flickers on and off during sleep. From a functional perspective, this could serve as a built-in safety mechanism, checking the environment periodically, making sure everything remains safe. Once again, this supports the idea that awareness is never completely absent, only modulated. We also have to look at clinical evidence. Patients in comas, vegetative states, or minimally conscious states often show surprising levels of brain activity. In some cases, functional MRI scans reveal responses to questions, even when the person appears entirely unresponsive. They may imagine playing tennis when asked, activating motor regions, or visualize moving through a house, activating spatial networks. These findings show that consciousness can exist in hidden forms, detectable only through precise measurements. Applied to sleep, this means that while you appear unconscious, measurable fragments of awareness might still be present. A related phenomenon is sleepwalking. Here, people engage in complex behaviors, walking, talking, even eating, while technically asleep. They may have little or no memory of the events afterward. This shows that the brain can coordinate motor activity and environmental monitoring even without conscious oversight. If nothing else, it demonstrates that parts of the brain remain awake enough to guide behavior, further blurring the line between sleeping and waking states. So what does all of this tell us? The scientific evidence points strongly toward a model where the brain is never entirely offline. Different theories emphasize different aspects. GWT highlights background processors continuing their work. IIT emphasizes diminished but persistent integration, and electrophysiology shows constant rhythms and bursts of activity. Even at the lowest ebb of awareness, fragments of monitoring, memory processing, and sensory responsiveness continue. Perhaps the best analogy is that of a city at night. Streets empty, offices close, lights dim, but the city does not disappear. Power grids hum, cleaning crews work, security patrols monitor, and in some neighborhoods, life continues in different rhythms. The city rests, but it never ceases. In the same way, your consciousness changes form during sleep, but it never entirely vanishes. Different circuits take the night shift, ensuring continuity, protection, and preparation for the next day. If we define the observer not as a singular self, but as the continuous orchestration of processes that monitor and regulate your existence, then yes, there is a part of you that never sleeps. It is not mystical, but biological, rooted in the unceasing dynamics of your brain and body. Awareness may dim, but vigilance, memory, integration, and regulation carry on. Sleep is not the absence of self, but the reorganization of it. By seeing consciousness in this light, we arrive at a profound but grounded conclusion. Life is continuity. Your awareness is not a light switch flipped off at night, but a flame that shifts in brightness, sometimes dim, sometimes vivid, but never fully extinguished. One of the most striking features of the human mind is its ability to focus on some things while ignoring others. This is the essence of attention, and it provides a scientific window into the observer self. When you pay attention, part of your brain is actively monitoring and selecting information, while other systems process background data without entering conscious awareness. This division of labor hints at why there may be a part of you that is always watching, even when you are not fully aware of it. Cognitive psychologists often describe attention using the metaphor of a spotlight. Imagine a dark stage with hundreds of props and actors scattered around. The spotlight illuminates only a small portion, allowing you to focus on specific objects, sounds, or thoughts. The rest of the stage remains in shadow, but it is still there, capable of entering the spotlight at any moment. This is not just a metaphor. Neuroscientists have identified networks in the brain that operate like attention spotlights. The dorsal attention network directs focus voluntarily, while the ventral attention network responds to unexpected events in the environment. Together, these systems allow the mind to monitor vast amounts of information while only consciously experiencing a fraction of it. This split is evident in phenomena like inattentional blindness. If you are asked to count the number of passes a basketball team makes in a video, you might completely miss a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. Your brain is actively monitoring some events while ignoring others, illustrating that observation is selective. Yet even when you miss the gorilla, your brain may still process it at a subconscious level. EEG studies show that unseen stimuli can trigger brain responses without entering conscious awareness. This indicates that some observer mechanisms remain active in the background, recording and evaluating information even when the spotlight of attention is elsewhere. Another way to understand this is through dual processing theory, which divides the mind into System 1 and System 2. System 1 operates automatically, quickly and unconsciously. It recognizes faces, drives a familiar route, and reacts to immediate danger without effort. System 2 is slower, deliberate, and conscious, handling planning, reasoning, and complex decision-making. Importantly, System 1 never stops functioning. Even while you sleep, your body maintains heart rate, breathing, and balance through automatic systems. In waking life, it constantly monitors the environment, interprets sensory input, and guides action. The observer self may be understood as the combination of these processes, an underlying system that continuously monitors and evaluates whether or not System 2 is actively engaged. Selective attention also shows us how the mind filters experiences while maintaining an internal record. For example, consider change blindness. Two nearly identical images flash in sequence with a small difference. Often, people fail to notice the change unless attention is directed to the altered area. Yet the brain is not entirely oblivious. Visual processing areas detect discrepancies, triggering subtle neural responses that may influence later memory or behavior. The fact that some parts of the brain remain sensitive even without conscious detection suggests a form of internal surveillance. The observer is always partially on duty. Experiments with multitasking reinforce this idea. When performing two tasks at once, performance usually suffers, indicating limits in conscious attention. Yet neuroimaging shows that separate brain regions continue processing information for each task, even when one task dominates conscious focus. The brain operates as a distributed network, with multiple layers of monitoring happening simultaneously. Some of these layers could correspond to the observer self, continuously sampling information and updating internal models of reality, independent of what you consciously notice. Attention also interacts with working memory, which temporarily holds information for manipulation and reasoning. Even when your focus shifts, the brain keeps certain items active in working memory, ready for use. For example, if you are listening to a lecture while planning dinner, your auditory cortex processes speech, your prefrontal cortex stores key points, and your default mode network monitors internal thoughts. These networks work in parallel, maintaining awareness of multiple streams of information. The observer self may be the emergent sense that integrates these layers into a coherent experience. Interestingly, attention is also dynamic, not static. Your brain constantly scans for novelty or potential threats. Psychologists call this vigilance, the capacity to maintain alertness over time. Even when performing routine tasks, your mind monitors subtle changes in the environment, such as a shift in light, a sound, or an unexpected movement. Functional MRI studies reveal that regions like the anterior cingulate cortex and insula are involved in detecting errors, conflicts, and unexpected events. These areas may serve as the neural basis for the watcher that keeps track of both internal and external states. Sleep research also intersects with attention. During REM and non-REM sleep, certain attention networks remain partially active. This explains phenomena such as sleeping through noise but waking to a relevant stimulus, like your name being called. Even in states where conscious attention seems absent, the brain continuously evaluates sensory information for significance, demonstrating that some observer-like mechanisms persist even in sleep. Cognitive psychologists also study meta-awareness, the capacity to monitor one's own thoughts and mental processes. This is the scientific term closest to what philosophers might call the observer self. Meta-awareness allows you to recognize when your mind has wandered, to reflect on your thoughts, and to correct errors. Experiments measuring mind wandering reveal that people spend up to 50% of their waking hours thinking about things unrelated to the immediate environment. Even during this wandering, a background system monitors deviations from goals, detects errors, and can bring attention back to the task at hand. The observer self, in this sense, is a constantly operating supervisory system. Neurological studies support this. Regions like the prefrontal cortex and posterior parietal cortex are active during self-monitoring tasks. Damage to these areas can impair error detection, reduce self-awareness, and affect the ability to control attention. This shows that the neural mechanisms of observation are not abstract. They are biological and measurable, forming the basis of an ever-present watcher. The psychology of perception also provides evidence for continuous observation. Our sensory systems process vast amounts of information without conscious awareness. The brain filters, prioritizes, and sometimes stores it for later retrieval. For example, studies on subliminal perception show that stimuli too weak to reach conscious awareness still influence decisions, emotions, and behavior. Even when not paying attention, your brain is silently observing and integrating information. This reinforces the idea that some aspect of the mind never truly rests. Finally, consider automaticity in skill acquisition. When learning a complex skill, such as driving, initially you must focus consciously on every action. Over time, the task becomes automatic, managed largely by unconscious processes in the basal ganglia. Yet even as you perform these actions without thinking, part of your mind continuously monitors performance, adjusting for errors or unexpected events. The observer self may emerge from this kind of distributed monitoring, a system that silently supervises activities, maintaining awareness without dominating conscious attention. In short, cognitive psychology paints a compelling picture. The brain operates in layers, with conscious attention being just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, distributed networks continuously monitor, evaluate, and integrate information. Attention, vigilance, meta-awareness, and automatic processing all point toward a system that never fully sleeps. The watcher may not be a mystical entity, but a functional consequence of the brain's design, ensuring stability, safety, and continuity of experience. By understanding attention and the supervisory systems of the mind, we gain a scientific framework for the observer self. It is not a single, magical part of you, but an emergent property of distributed networks, always active, selectively alert, and continuously integrating information. Even when consciousness appears dim or absent, during mind-wandering, sleep, or automatic behavior, these mechanisms quietly operate in the background, forming the brain's ever-present monitoring system. Memory is one of the most fascinating windows into the idea of an observer self. Even when we are not consciously aware of what we are experiencing, our brain is continuously encoding, storing, and retrieving information. This constant activity functions like a silent recorder, allowing the mind to monitor and integrate experience over time. By examining how memory works, we can see evidence of a part of the brain that never fully sleeps. Human memory is not a single system, but a set of specialized processes, each responsible for different types of information. Episodic memory allows us to recall events, such as what we had for breakfast or a conversation from last week. Procedural memory stores learned skills, like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard. Working memory holds information temporarily for immediate use, like a phone number or a mental calculation. Each system operates in parallel, often without conscious oversight, yet contributes to a coherent sense of self. From a neuroscience perspective, these memory systems are rooted in specific brain regions. The hippocampus plays a central role in forming and consolidating episodic memories. The striatum manages procedural learning and habits. The prefrontal cortex supports working memory and executive control, integrating information from multiple sources. Together, these networks maintain an ongoing record of experiences, continuously monitoring the flow of events even when we are not actively paying attention. Consider how memory functions during sleep. The process of consolidation strengthens and stabilizes newly acquired information. In non-REM sleep, slow-wave activity supports the transfer of memories from temporary storage in the hippocampus to more permanent cortical regions. In REM sleep, emotional and procedural memories are processed, often appearing in dreams. Even while consciousness seems absent, the brain is actively organizing, evaluating, and integrating information, suggesting that some form of internal observation is always ongoing. The concept of the observer self is also evident in meta-memory, the ability to monitor and evaluate one's own memories. When you try to recall an event, your mind does not just retrieve the memory, it assesses confidence, cross-references related information, and identifies inconsistencies. This self-monitoring function depends on the prefrontal cortex and other association areas. It demonstrates that part of the brain is continuously evaluating its own records, acting as a background observer even when you are focused on other tasks. Memory research also highlights the distinction between implicit and explicit processes. Explicit memory involves conscious recollection of facts and events. Implicit memory influences behavior without conscious awareness. For example, being faster at a task due to prior practice, or showing preferences based on prior exposure. Even when you are unaware of it, the brain is silently observing and encoding patterns, tracking probabilities, and adapting responses. This reinforces the idea that an observer self does not require active, conscious attention to operate. A striking example comes from studies on subliminal learning. Participants can be exposed to stimuli below conscious perception thresholds and later show measurable changes in behavior, preference, or decision-making. Neural recordings show activation in sensory and association areas during these exposures, confirming that the brain is processing and storing information without conscious awareness. Here, the watcher is operating at a level beneath consciousness, continuously integrating signals into the broader mental framework. Memory also interacts closely with attention. What we attend to is more likely to be encoded effectively into long-term memory. Yet the brain is capable of recording background information as well. Experiments in inattentional blindness have shown that people may fail to consciously notice a stimulus while their brain still encodes some aspects of it, which can influence later decisions. Even unnoticed events leave traces in neural circuits. The observer self may be understood as this continuous monitoring mechanism, integrating attended and unattended information into a running record of experience. Another layer of complexity is prospective memory, the ability to remember to perform actions in the future, such as taking medication or sending an email at a specific time. Prospective memory relies on both working memory and attention systems, and often operates without active awareness. You might go about your day without consciously thinking about your future tasks, yet your brain monitors cues in the environment that trigger the intended action. This demonstrates that the mind maintains a form of ongoing vigilance, silently coordinating behavior with goals. The study of amnesia and memory disorders provides further insight. Patients with damage to the hippocampus may lose the ability to form new episodic memories, but retain procedural skills. Others may lose explicit recall, but show implicit learning. These dissociations reveal that multiple observer-like systems are at work in parallel, each monitoring and recording different aspects of experience. Even when conscious recollection is impaired, parts of the mind continue to observe, process, and influence behavior. Memory is not just about the past, it also informs perception and decision-making. The brain constantly compares new sensory input with stored representations, detecting patterns and anomalies. This predictive function is central to cognitive psychology and links memory to the observer self. When something unexpected happens, the brain detects the mismatch and flags it for attention. This ongoing comparison between incoming data and stored records suggests a monitoring system that operates continuously, even without conscious intervention. Neuroscientists have explored this idea further with neuroimaging studies. Functional MRI and EEG show that the hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and parietal regions are active not only during memory recall, but also during passive monitoring of ongoing events. The brain is constantly assessing relevance, encoding details, and updating internal models. These mechanisms provide the infrastructure for an observer self that maintains continuity across time, integrating past experiences with present input and future planning. Interestingly, memory also shapes self-awareness. The sense of a coherent self relies on the continuity of experience, which depends on memory systems. Autobiographical memory provides the narrative of I, connecting past events to present identity. Even when attention shifts or consciousness fades during sleep, procedural, implicit, and background memory systems maintain the structure of self. In cognitive terms, the observer self may be the emergent awareness that tracks and integrates these records, providing stability and consistency over time. Studies on dream incorporation further support this. Elements from waking experiences often appear in dreams, indicating that memory networks are active and selectively integrating information. The brain evaluates relevance, emotional content, and associations, effectively continuing the role of the observer even when consciousness is altered. Memory systems do not pause during dreaming. They function as part of a continuous monitoring and recording process. Finally, consider the role of habit formation. Habits are stored in procedural memory circuits and operate largely outside of conscious awareness. Yet the brain monitors performance, adjusts for errors, and integrates feedback to refine behavior. This is another example of distributed observation. Multiple subsystems continuously track, record, and correct behavior, supporting the idea that the mind never truly stops observing. In summary, memory provides compelling evidence for a cognitive observer self. Through episodic, procedural, working, and implicit systems, the brain continuously monitors, records, and evaluates experience. Even when consciousness is diminished, during sleep, distraction, or automatic behavior, these systems remain active, silently observing and integrating information. Attention, meta-memory, prospective memory, and error monitoring all point to a distributed surveillance mechanism within the mind. By understanding memory as a continuous multi-layered process, we see that a part of the mind is always watching. This observer self is not mystical, but grounded in the measurable functions of the brain. It maintains continuity, stability, and adaptability, quietly monitoring the flow of experience, shaping perception, and supporting the coherent sense of self. When we ask whether a part of you never sleeps, it is helpful to consider how the brain constructs the reality you experience. Far from being a passive receiver of sensory input, the mind continuously interprets, predicts, and corrects incoming information. This predictive function happens moment by moment, and it does not entirely cease during sleep or unconscious states. In fact, the brain's predictive machinery operates at all times, forming one of the clearest examples of a system that never fully sleeps. Cognitive psychologists often describe the brain as a prediction machine. Instead of merely responding to stimuli, it anticipates what is likely to happen next. This predictive function relies on prior experience, memory, and internal models of the world. It is the foundation of perception. Your brain does not passively receive the world, it actively constructs it. From this perspective, the observer self could be seen as the component that continuously evaluates and updates predictions, silently monitoring whether incoming information matches expectations. A classic example comes from visual perception. When you walk down a familiar street, your brain predicts the locations of objects, the timing of traffic, and the contours of buildings. Most of this happens without conscious thought. If something unexpected occurs, like a ball rolling into your path, the brain rapidly detects the error and redirects attention. This constant monitoring demonstrates that parts of the mind are always active, scanning the environment, comparing reality to expectation, and preparing responses. Even when you are resting or asleep, similar processes are at work internally, monitoring internal simulations and preparing the body for future action. This predictive function is closely linked to error detection, a key component of cognition. Neuroscientists have identified networks such as the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, that respond when predictions fail. The ACC signals discrepancies between expected and actual outcomes, prompting adjustments. This mechanism operates continuously during waking life and in reduced form during sleep. It is as if the brain never fully rests, continuously checking for mismatches and updating its internal models. This ongoing process is a scientific manifestation of an observer that remains active even when consciousness appears diminished. Predictive processing theory, advanced by Carl Friston and others, formalizes this idea. The brain constantly generates hypotheses about the world and compares them to incoming sensory data. Errors between expectation and reality, so-called prediction errors, drive learning and adaptation. Crucially, this process operates at multiple levels, from low-level sensory predictions to high-level cognitive models of goals and intentions. Even during sleep, the brain rehearses scenarios, consolidates memories, and fine-tunes predictions. This suggests that a form of the observer self is embedded in the very architecture of neural processing, never fully shutting down. Perception itself relies on this predictive function. What you see, hear, and feel is not a direct reflection of the environment, but a construction created by your brain. Optical illusions demonstrate this vividly. Your mind fills in missing information based on expectations, creating a coherent but sometimes inaccurate experience. This constructive process is continuous and automatic. While the conscious mind may drift or sleep, the underlying predictive machinery remains active, monitoring and integrating information at all levels. Memory and prediction are deeply intertwined. Episodic memories allow the brain to simulate future events, testing different scenarios in advance. For example, when preparing for a conversation or imagining a complex task, your mind predicts outcomes based on prior experiences. This internal simulation happens silently, often outside conscious awareness, and continues even during sleep. Dreams themselves may represent this predictive rehearsal, allowing the brain to evaluate possible threats, solutions, and social interactions. The observer self, in this context, is the emergent monitoring system that evaluates and integrates these predictions. Research on microarousals and sensory processing during sleep provides further evidence. While deeply asleep, your brain still monitors the environment for significant stimuli, such as a baby crying or a smoke alarm sounding. Auditory and somatosensory systems remain sensitive to salient information, demonstrating that a part of you is always on alert. Even without full consciousness, the predictive machinery of the brain evaluates incoming signals, comparing them to expectations, and deciding whether to trigger arousal. This continuous evaluation is a scientific representation of the mind's never-sleeping observer. Experiments with selective attention also illustrate this principle. In one study, participants were exposed to subtle cues while performing tasks that occupied most of their attention. The brain responded to these peripheral cues, processing them at unconscious levels. Similarly, predictive coding theories suggest that even unattended stimuli are evaluated for relevance. with neural circuits continuously updating expectations. This background monitoring parallels the function of an observer that remains vigilant, integrating data even when consciousness is focused elsewhere. The brain's predictive functions extend to motor control and bodily regulation. Even when resting or sleeping, it anticipates the needs of the body, adjusting posture, respiration, and heart rate. These anticipatory adjustments are largely automatic but demonstrate continuous observation and monitoring. From a cognitive perspective, the observer self could be considered the emergent system that integrates sensory input, memory, predictions, and motor responses, ensuring adaptive behavior at all times. The concept of metaprediction is also relevant. The brain not only predicts the world, but also predicts the outcomes of its own predictions. This second layer of monitoring allows the mind to evaluate its own processes, detect errors, and refine strategies. Neuroscientists suggest that such recursive monitoring is crucial for self-awareness and cognitive flexibility. It may be the scientific counterpart of the observer self, a system that monitors both the external environment and the brain's internal operations. Dream studies reinforce this view. During REM sleep, the brain generates vivid simulations of possible scenarios. Neuroimaging shows activation in the prefrontal cortex, parietal regions, and hippocampus, areas involved in planning, spatial navigation, and memory. Even without conscious oversight, the brain rehearses and evaluates, testing predictions against simulated experiences. This demonstrates that predictive monitoring, a core aspect of the observer self, continues uninterrupted, even when consciousness is offline. Finally, consider how this predictive function supports survival. Evolution has favored brains that continuously evaluate and anticipate. Even while asleep, the mind monitors threats, integrates past experiences, and prepares for future challenges. The observer self, therefore, may not be a singular entity, but a distributed system embedded in the predictive architecture of the brain. It ensures continuity, stability, and adaptability, operating 24/7. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for a part of you that never sleeps lies in the domain of cognitive control. Cognitive control refers to the brain's ability to plan, monitor, and regulate thoughts and behavior to achieve goals. It involves evaluating actions, detecting errors, and adjusting strategies. These executive functions operate continuously, even when consciousness is diminished, providing a clear example of the observer self in action. The prefrontal cortex is the central hub of executive control. This region allows for complex planning, decision-making, and self-monitoring. It does not function in isolation. It interacts with memory systems, attention networks, and sensory corticas to integrate information across the brain. This distributed coordination enables the mind to maintain awareness of both external events and internal states. Even during periods of low consciousness, such as light sleep, meditation, or focused automatic behavior, the prefrontal cortex continues to process, monitor, and adjust activity in subtle ways. A key aspect of cognitive control is error monitoring. The brain constantly evaluates outcomes against goals and expectations. Neural structures like the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, detect when errors occur, triggering adjustments in behavior or attention. This monitoring process is ongoing, whether or not we are consciously aware of it. It acts as a silent observer, ensuring that actions align with desired outcomes. In everyday life, this allows you to correct mistakes, avoid dangers, and optimize performance, without consciously tracking every detail. Meta-awareness is closely linked to cognitive control. This is the capacity to reflect on your own mental processes, recognizing mind wandering, detecting biases, and evaluating decisions. Meta-awareness is crucial for learning, problem-solving, and self-regulation. It allows a part of your mind to observe thoughts and behaviors, integrating them into a coherent sense of self. Neuroimaging studies show that meta-awareness involves prefrontal and parietal networks, which remain active even when conscious focus shifts elsewhere. This supports the idea that some components of the mind are always on duty, monitoring and evaluating mental activity. Consider the phenomenon of automaticity. Many of our daily behaviors, from typing to walking to driving familiar routes, become automated over time. While conscious attention may be reduced, executive systems continue to supervise and fine-tune performance. Errors are corrected, deviations are adjusted for, and sensory input is integrated to guide smooth behavior. Even in routine tasks, the observer self is quietly monitoring outcomes, demonstrating continuity in oversight. Self-regulation provides another example. The mind constantly manages emotional responses, impulses, and goals. When you resist temptation, focus on a task, or maintain patience, your executive systems are active. These processes often operate below conscious awareness, tracking multiple goals simultaneously and adjusting strategies as needed. This invisible monitoring contributes to a continuous form of internal observation, showing that the mind does not fully switch off even when the body rests or attention drifts. Neuroscientific evidence reinforces this idea. Functional MRI studies reveal that prefrontal networks remain active during tasks that involve error monitoring, anticipation, and adaptive control, even when the individual is engaged in low-level activities. EEG recordings show that the brain produces preparatory signals before voluntary actions, indicating continuous oversight. These neural patterns suggest that a part of the brain functions as a background observer, constantly integrating sensory input, memories, and goals to guide behavior. Sleep studies also provide insight. While deep sleep reduces activity in prefrontal regions, light sleep and REM stages still show significant activation of networks involved in monitoring and prediction. Microarousals during sleep, even those we do not consciously notice, may reflect the continued operation of error detection and environmental monitoring systems. In effect, a portion of the executive brain remains active, silently evaluating information, protecting the organism, and maintaining continuity. Mind-wandering and spontaneous thought offer another perspective. While attention drifts away from tasks, executive systems often continue to track the wandering mind. Studies show that even during unstructured thinking, the brain evaluates relevance, coherence, and potential outcomes. The observer self can be conceptualized as the system that monitors and integrates these streams of thought, ensuring adaptive responses without requiring full conscious effort. The concept of predictive executive function also applies. Executive systems not only respond to current events, but anticipate future consequences, guiding decisions in real time. This predictive capacity allows the brain to prepare for potential challenges, simulate scenarios, and adjust behavior accordingly. Even in states where conscious awareness is diminished, the predictive executive system continues to operate, maintaining an internal form of vigilance. Error correction in learning provides further evidence. When acquiring new skills, the brain tracks performance, detects deviations, and refines behavior over time. This involves both conscious and unconscious monitoring. For example, a pianist practicing a piece may notice mistakes consciously, but subtle corrections in finger movement and timing occur automatically. These unconscious adjustments reflect continuous oversight, demonstrating that the observer self functions across multiple layers of processing. The integration of attention, memory, and executive function forms a cohesive system that monitors both internal and external states. Attention selects relevant information, memory provides context, and executive control evaluates and adjusts behavior. Together, these systems maintain a continuous record of experience, functioning even when conscious awareness ebbs. The observer self, in cognitive terms, emerges from this distributed, always active monitoring network. Even emotion regulation reflects continuous observation. The brain monitors physiological states, sensory input, and contextual cues to guide emotional responses. The amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate cortex interact to evaluate threats and opportunities. This regulatory system operates continuously, subtly adjusting reactions without requiring conscious oversight. The mind's ability to maintain stability in fluctuating environments depends on this persistent monitoring. As we arrive at the final part of this exploration, it's time to return to the phenomenon of sleep. We began by asking a simple but profound question. Is there a part of you that never sleeps? Through cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and studies of attention, memory, perception, and executive function, the answer becomes increasingly clear. Even during sleep, some aspects of your mind remain continuously active, monitoring, predicting, and integrating information. Sleep is often described as a period of rest, a time when consciousness fades and the body and brain recover. But scientific research shows that sleep is far from a total shutdown. Instead, it is a complex, active state in which different brain systems alternate between reduced and enhanced activity. Sleep consists of cycles, including non-REM, NREM stages, marked by slow wave activity and memory consolidation, and REM sleep, characterized by vivid dreams, emotional processing, and higher brain activity. Each stage serves specific functions, but none represents a complete cessation of mental processes. During non-REM sleep, the brain engages in memory consolidation. The hippocampus and cortex communicate, transferring newly acquired experiences from temporary storage to long-term memory. This process involves coordinated neural oscillations, including slow waves and sleep spindles, which facilitate synaptic plasticity. Even though consciousness may be diminished, these mechanisms demonstrate that the brain is actively monitoring and reorganizing information. The observer self in this context may be represented by the neural networks that continue to evaluate and store experiences, quietly maintaining continuity of the self. REM sleep provides another fascinating window into the never-sleeping mind. During REM, the brain exhibits activity levels similar to wakefulness, particularly in the limbic system and areas associated with perception and emotion. Dreams emerge during this stage, often weaving together fragments of memory, emotion, and sensory input. Neuroimaging shows that prefrontal regions, though less active than in wakefulness, are still engaged in planning and monitoring, especially in lucid dreaming. This suggests that even when the mind appears immersed in a narrative separate from reality, some components continue to observe and regulate experience. Sleep also involves sensory monitoring. Experiments show that people can respond to important external stimuli while remaining asleep, such as a baby crying or a fire alarm sounding. Neural pathways continuously scan the environment, evaluating threats and relevance, and can trigger micro-arousals or full awakenings. This automatic vigilance demonstrates that the observer self is embedded in the brain's architecture, maintaining awareness at a background level even when consciousness seems offline. Consider the phenomenon of sleepwalking or parasomnias. Complex behaviors such as walking, eating, or navigating an environment can occur without conscious awareness. While these behaviors seem unconscious, they require coordination among motor, sensory, and cognitive systems. The underlying networks continue to monitor, guide, and adjust actions, demonstrating that the brain never truly stops functioning. These examples provide further evidence that a part of you is always on duty, ensuring safety, stability, and continuity. Even in dreams, your mind demonstrates forms of observation and monitoring. Studies of lucid dreaming reveal that the prefrontal cortex, normally less active during REM, can become re-engaged. Dreamers become aware they are dreaming, reflecting metacognitive processes that resemble executive oversight. The ability to monitor thoughts, control dream actions, and evaluate experiences shows that observer-like mechanisms are capable of functioning during altered states of consciousness. From a cognitive psychology perspective, we have seen that attention, memory, predictive processing, and executive function all involve continuous monitoring. Attention selectively illuminates some information, while background systems record, evaluate, and integrate unattended stimuli. Memory provides continuity, allowing the brain to compare current input with prior experience. Predictive systems anticipate outcomes and detect errors, adjusting behavior accordingly. Executive functions oversee these processes, maintaining coherence, stability, and adaptability. Collectively, these mechanisms support the idea that some aspects of the mind are always awake, always observing, and always integrating. The idea of a never-sleeping observer also aligns with evolutionary reasoning. Humans, like other animals, have evolved brains capable of remaining vigilant even during rest. Continuous monitoring of internal and external environments ensures survival, detects threats, and optimizes adaptive behavior. Even in deep sleep, the brain prioritizes cues relevant to safety, such as sounds, odors, or movements. This vigilance is not conscious in the usual sense, but reflects the operation of systems that function as a silent, ever-present observer. Physiological systems further reinforce this notion. The autonomic nervous system regulates heart rate, breathing, temperature, and other critical processes during sleep. Feedback loops constantly evaluate the body's internal state, adjusting for homeostasis. While not conscious, this regulatory network is a form of ongoing observation, tracking the body's needs and maintaining stability. In this sense, the observer self is distributed across both neural and physiological systems, continuously active even during rest. Memory consolidation during sleep also provides continuity of the self. By integrating daily experiences, filtering irrelevant information, and strengthening significant memories, the brain maintains a coherent narrative identity. Procedural and emotional memories are similarly processed, supporting skill development and emotional regulation. These processes occur even without awareness, demonstrating that the brain's monitoring systems are never fully inactive. The observer self operates in the background, ensuring continuity, coherence, and adaptability. The integration of cognitive control and sleep phenomena also sheds light on the nature of consciousness. Even when the conscious mind is offline, executive systems, metacognition, and monitoring networks continue to function. Error detection, predictive adjustments, and memory consolidation all reflect ongoing evaluation and adaptation. These processes suggest that consciousness is not a single, binary state, but a distributed network of active systems, some of which remain awake even during sleep. Dreaming itself provides a unique example. While engaged in immersive experiences that appear detached from reality, the mind selectively monitors internal and external signals. Dreams often incorporate elements of the waking world, emotionally significant experiences, and unresolved problems. The brain evaluates, integrates, and rehearses these scenarios. The observer self, therefore, may emerge from this silent monitoring. A system that continuously tracks internal narratives, maintains continuity, and prepares adaptive responses. Finally, we can consider the observer self as a distributed, multi-layered system. It is not a singular entity sitting atop the brain, but a network of interconnected functions. Attention, memory, predictive processing, executive oversight, and physiological regulation. Each component contributes to continuous monitoring, ensuring that some part of you remains active, attentive, and integrated, even while other parts rest. Sleep does not eliminate this observer. It merely shifts its operations to different subsystems and priorities. In conclusion, the scientific evidence supports the idea that a part of you never sleeps. Through attention, memory, prediction, and executive function, the brain maintains continuous observation and integration of internal and external information. Sleep is not an absence of awareness, but a reorganization of it, with some networks active in monitoring, regulating, and preparing the mind and body for future action. The observer self, therefore, is both functional and measurable, a distributed system that quietly watches, evaluates, and integrates experience at all times. When you reflect on this, it becomes clear that your consciousness is not entirely bound by the cycles of sleep. There is continuity in your mental processes, a silent vigilance that preserves coherence, stability, and adaptability. Even when your conscious mind rests, some aspect of you remains awake, observing, and participating in the ongoing narrative of your existence. Sleep is a shift in focus, not a shutdown. In this sense, the observer self is never truly off, providing a continuous thread of awareness that connects waking, dreaming, and everything in between.